The chain came off the cant hook at 2:41 in the morning, and Wade Lemoine stood in the spill of his headlamp, with the broken link in his palm, and understood that the silence had been there longer than the broken chain had. He had been working the deck alone, because that was how the night had gone. The skidder had thrown a hydraulic line near dusk, and he had spent 2 hours bleeding the system and chasing the leak with a flashlight in his teeth. And by the time he had it holding pressure, the rest of the crew had gone down the mountain to the camp. He did not mind. He had worked the Allagash country for 19 years, and he had spent more nights alone on a landing than he could count. The dark up here was a known thing. He trusted it the way he trusted the grade of a road or the set of a choker. It did what it was supposed to do. That was the first thing wrong, and he noticed it before he could name it. The dark was doing something it was not supposed to do. It was too quiet. He stood very still and listened. A working forest at night was never silent. There were owls in the hardwood stands, and there were coyotes that ran the cut blocks after the machines went quiet, and there was the constant small machinery of the woods itself, the settling of frost, the tick of cooling metal, the wind moving through the spruce in a long, even breath. He had fallen asleep to that wind 1,000 times. Now there was nothing. No wind in the crowns, no bird. No coyote working the slash. The deck lights hummed faintly on the generator, and beyond the reach of that hum, the world had simply stopped making sound. He told himself it was the cold. A hard front had come through the day before and dropped the temperature into the low teens. And cold could flatten a forest, drive the animals into cover, still the wind. He had seen it do that. He repeated the explanation to himself the way he checked a load before he pulled out methodically, item by item, and the explanation held for about as long as it took him to notice that his own breath was loud in his ears. Wade Lemoine was 46 years old. He was a heavy man through the chest and shoulders, the kind of build that came from 2 decades of work and not from any gym. And he had a habit of standing flat-footed and still when he was thinking, which his wife said made him look like a stump with a beard. He did not exaggerate. He had testified once in a workman's comp case, and the lawyer had been frustrated with him because every time the man tried to get Wade to say a thing was bad or terrible or dangerous. The grade was 11%. The brake line had 40 pounds of pressure where it should have had 90. The log had been 32 inches at the butt. He gave numbers because numbers did not lie, and adjectives did. And a man who worked around things that could kill him learned young to trust the one and distrust the other. So when he stood on that deck and felt the silence press in, he did not reach for a frightening word. He reached for a fact. So, the fact was that it was 2:41 in the morning, the temperature was 14 degrees, and every animal within hearing of him had stopped moving at the same time. He picked the broken link up off the frozen ground and put it in his coat pocket because that was habit, and he walked to the truck to get the second chain out of the box. And that was when he saw the prints. They came out of the slash pile on the north side of the landing and crossed the open ground toward the truck and stopped. They were pressed into the skim of frozen mud at the edge of the deck where the machines had churned it soft during the day and the cold had set it overnight. And they were clear enough that Wade did not have to crouch to read them, though he crouched anyway, because reading sign was something he did with his whole body. He had tracked deer and moose and bear his entire life. He had followed a wounded bull for 9 miles once and put it down clean, and he knew the gait and the register of every animal that walked that country. These were not from any of them. The print was long. He laid his own gloved hand beside it, and the print ran longer than his hand from heel to the front of the pad. and there were 4 toes, and at the front of each toe was a deep, narrow point where a claw had gone into the frozen mud and held. A bear had 5 toes, and a wide pad and claws that splayed. A moose was a cloven hoof. A coyote or a wolf, if there were still wolves in that country, would have left a neat oval the size of a silver dollar with the toes tight and the claws barely registering. This was none of those. The pad was narrow and long like a dog's, but the size was wrong. The size was so wrong that Wade crouched there in the cold and did the only thing his mind knew how to do, which was to run the explanations one after another and watch each one fail. A big dog. Somebody's loose, mastiff, run off from a camp. But there were no camps within 20 miles that were occupied this time of year, and a dog did not move through a deck this quiet, and a dog left claw marks that scuffed, not claw marks that punched straight down into frozen ground under enough weight to crack the skin. A bear with a bad foot, walking strange. But the toe count was wrong, and the stride was wrong. And that was the thing that finally stopped the ladder of explanations, because Wade had measured the stride without meaning to, the way he measured everything, and the prints were spaced too far apart. He stepped it off. From the center of one print to the center of the next was just over 5 feet. The thing had crossed that frozen ground in strides of 5 feet, and the prints did not alternate the way a 4-legged animal's would. They came in pairs, left and right, then a gap, then left and right again. It had been walking on 2 legs. He stood up. He did not run the explanation again, because there was no rung left on the ladder. He simply stood up in the cold with the broken link in his pocket and the second chain forgotten in the box, and he looked at the tree line where the prints had come from, and the tree line gave him nothing back. Black spruce, close and dark, the kind of dark that felt thick between the trees. Whatever had stood there to leave those prints was not standing there now. He could not have said how he knew that. He knew it the way an animal knows it, in the skin and not in the head. He got the second chain. He worked fast, and he did not let himself hurry, which were 2 different things. And he knew the difference, and he finished binding the load, and he put his tools away in the order. He always put them away. Then he got in the truck, and he started it, and the heater came up, and he sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel and made himself breathe. The drive down was 11 miles of logging road that he had driven in every condition the North Maine woods could produce. Washboard and mud and ice, and the deep ruts of spring breakup. And he knew every turn of it. He kept the truck at 15 miles an hour, because the road did not allow more, and because his loaded trailer behind him weighed what it weighed, and the headlights swung across the spruce and the bare hardwood and the high-cut banks where the road had been blasted through ledge. And for the first 3 miles, there was nothing but the road. At the 4th mile, something paced him. He caught it first as a wrongness in the light. The headlights threw their cone forward and to the sides, and at the edge of that cone, in the dark beyond the road's shoulder, there was a place where the light should have caught the trunks of the spruce, and instead caught nothing, a moving absence that kept level with the cab. He did not look directly at it. He had hunted enough to know that the eye caught movement better at its edge, and he kept his eyes on the road and watched the thing at the corner of his vision, and it stayed with him. It moved through the timber off the passenger side at the speed of the truck, 15 miles an hour, through dense black spruce and blowdown and snow, without the crashing and breaking that a moose would have made, without any sound at all that he could hear over the engine. It just kept pace. A man can hold a lot at 15 miles an hour. Wade held the wheel, and he held the speed, and he held himself still, and he thought about the rifle behind the seat, a .30 -30 he kept for exactly the reasons a man kept a rifle in that country, and he did not reach for it because reaching for it meant taking a hand off the wheel on a road that did not forgive a wandering hand, and because some part of him understood that the rifle was not the point. The thing was not threatening him. It was traveling with him. It was watching how he moved. Not startled. Measuring. At the 5th mile, the road bent hard around a granite shoulder and dropped toward the brook crossing, and the timber on the passenger side fell away into a cut block, an opening of maybe 40 acres, where the trees had been taken 2 seasons back and the slash lay under the snow in long humped rows. The headlights swept across the open ground as the truck came around the bend, and for the length of one breath, the cone of light passed over the thing that had been pacing him. It was at the edge of the cut, where the standing timber met the opening, and it was upright. The light caught it from the side and below, the way headlights catch a deer at the road's edge, and Wade saw it for less than a second before the bend carried the beam off it and into the empty cut. He did not see all of it. He saw a height that did not belong to anything that walked that country. A head set forward on a thick neck, a long muzzle, shoulders heavy and sloped, and one eye that took the headlight and threw it back amber and steady. Then the road straightened, and the light swung away, and the thing was behind him in the dark. He did not stop. Stopping was the one thing every part of him agreed on. He kept the truck at 15, and he went down the grade to the brook crossing and over the timber bridge and up the far side. And he did not look in the mirror because the mirror would show him only the dark and his own headlights would not be in it. And he drove the last 6 miles to the camp with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set and the heater roaring and his own breath loud and even in the cab. The camp was a cluster of trailers and a cook shack and a fuel shed set in a clearing where the company had logged 40 years before and never let the trees come back. There were lights on in 2 of the trailers. Wade pulled the rig into the yard and shut it down and sat for a moment in the ticking quiet, and then he got out and the cold took him, and the silence of the deck was not here. Here there was wind in the few big pines the company had left for shade, and somewhere down toward the brook a barred owl was asking its question into the dark, and the ordinary night sounds came back around him. Denise was awake when he came in. She was always awake when he came in late, not because she worried in any way she would admit to, but because 19 years had set her clock to his, and she was at the little table in the trailer's galley, with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her, and a paperback open and unread. She looked at his face, and she put the book down. What happened? Skidder threw a line. He hung his coat on the hook by the door, and the broken chain link knocked against the wall in the pocket. Cost me 2 hours. That's not what I asked. She had a way of going still that was like his own. You've got to look. He sat down across from her. He was a man who did not lie to his wife, not because he was a saint, but because he was bad at it, and they both knew it. And he turned the cold teacup a quarter turn on the table and looked at it, instead of her. Saw something on the road coming down. A moose? No. A bear? No. He looked up. I don't know what it was. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I do. Her father had trapped, and her uncles had guided, and she was not a woman who spooked at the woods. She watched her husband's face, and she did not laugh, and she did not tell him he was tired, which was the thing he had been braced for. And instead, she asked the question that told him she had taken him seriously. The cut block above the brook, where they took the timber off 2 years back. He turned the cup again. It paced me from the 4 mile in the timber, kept right up with the truck. She was quiet for a moment. Then she got up and put the kettle on, which is what she did when she needed her hands busy. and with her back to him, she said, "The seer boy, Marcel. He runs the loader days. He told Lloyd last week he saw something cross the road up by the gravel pit. Lloyd told him he'd been into the cooking sherry. She set 2 cups down. Lloyd thought it was funny. He thought about the gravel pit, which was up on the high ground 3 miles past his deck, and he thought that the gravel pit and the cut block above the brook were 6 miles apart, and that whatever he had seen had been moving south and east, down off the high ground toward the camp. And he did not say any of that to Denise, because there was no good way to say it, and because saying it would make it a thing they both had to carry. He drank the tea. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time, and when he did sleep, he slept with the .30, -30, leaned in the corner by the door, instead of in its place behind the truck seat. And he did not tell Denise he had done that, but she saw it in the morning, and she did not say anything either. The next day was a work day, and work did not stop for a man's bad night. Wade was on the deck before light with the rest of the crew, and the machines came up roaring, and the cold daylight came gray over the spruce, and the woods were just the woods, frozen and loud and ordinary, and the prints at the edge of the landing were still there. He did not say anything at first. He walked the deck with his coffee, and he came to the place where the prints crossed the frozen mud, and he crouched there in the daylight and looked at them, and they were exactly what they had been at 2:41 in the morning, which was somehow worse. Daylight was supposed to shrink things. Daylight was supposed to show you the ordinary explanation you had missed in the dark. The prints did not shrink. In the gray morning light they were longer and clearer than they had been by headlamp, 4 toes and the deep claw points and the narrow pad, the stride stepping off at just over 5 feet, the pairs coming left and right with the gap between. Lloyd Babineau came over with his own coffee, because Lloyd noticed everything that happened on his landing. He was the foreman, a wiry old man with a face like a dried apple, and he had run crews in that country for 30 years, and he had a low opinion of anything that wasted his time. He looked at the prints over Wade's shoulder. "Bare?" Lloyd said. "Count the toes." Lloyd looked. He was quiet for a second longer than a man is quiet when he is sure. "Big dog step off the stride." Lloyd did not step off the stride. He looked at the prints for a while, and then he straightened up and drank his coffee, and looked out at the tree line on the north side of the landing, and Wade watched the old man's face do the same thing his own had done in the night. Run the explanations and watch them fail, and arrive at the place where there was no explanation left, and a man had to decide whether to look at that place or look away. Lloyd looked away. "Get a tarp over that load," he said, "before the sun gets on it." And he walked back to the machines, and Wade let him go, because he understood. A foreman who admitted he could not name a thing on his own landing was a foreman who had lost his footing, and Lloyd could not afford to lose his footing in front of a crew. But Lloyd did something that afternoon that told Wade the old man had not looked away as completely as he pretended. He sent Marcel Sear over to the deck on a made-up errand, and Marcel found Wade at the truck, and the young man stood there working up to something, and finally he said, "Lloyd says you saw it. Saw something up by the pit last week." Marcel was 22, and he did not have the years yet to keep his face still, and his face was not still now. It was just standing in the road. I come around the corner in the loader, and it was just standing there in the headlights, and then it went off the bank into the trees. Not down the bank. Up it. Straight up a bank I couldn't climb on my hands and knees. I didn't tell nobody but Lloyd. He laughed at me. I've been thinking maybe I dreamed it. You didn't dream it. Marcel looked at him with something like gratitude, which was a hard thing to watch. A young man grateful to be told the worst thing he knew was real. "What is it?" "I don't know." Wade said it flat and plain because the boy needed to hear a steady man say it and not pretend. "I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to make something up so you feel better. But you saw what you saw." "I saw it too." "That's two of us now. And we're not both into the cooking sherry. That should have been the end of the strange part. A thing seen twice. A thing that left a print. A thing a man could put away in the part of his mind where the unexplained things went. The lights over the lake, and the sound in the swamp, and the track in the snow. The country was full of those, and a man could carry them and still get up and go to work. Wade wanted it to be that kind of thing. He wanted to put it in that drawer. It would not go in the drawer, because that night it came to the camp. He woke at 3:12 by the clock on the shelf, and he woke the way he had not woken since he was a young man in a hunting camp with something outside. All at once and complete. No grogginess. His eyes open in the dark. The trailer was cold. A little electric heater ticked. Denise breathed slow and even beside him. And outside on the frozen ground of the camp yard, something was walking. He knew the sound of every step a thing could take in that yard. He knew the crunch of a man's boot and the soft fall of a deer and the heavy shuffle of a bear in the garbage. This was none of those. It was a slow, deliberate two-legged tread, and it was heavy. Heavy enough that he could feel the faintest answering tick in the trailer's thin floor as the weight came down and it was moving along the side of the trailer toward the end where the bedroom was. Wade did not move for a moment. He lay in the dark and he listened to it. Come step and step and step, unhurried. And he understood that it was not trying to be quiet. He had heard how it moved through the timber beside the road without a sound. This was not that. This was a thing letting itself be heard. This was a thing that wanted him to know it was there. He got up. He got the rifle from the corner, and he worked the lever as quietly as a lever could be worked, which was not quiet at all. A hard-oiled metal sound that filled the little bedroom, and the footsteps outside stopped. They stopped directly outside the bedroom wall. There was a window there, a small aluminum-framed slider with a curtain Denise had made, and the bottom of the window was about level with Wade's chest as he stood, which meant the ground outside was a foot or so below the trailer floor, which meant that a thing standing outside that window with its head at the level of the glass was a thing that stood. Wade stood in the dark of the bedroom with the rifle in his hands, and he looked at the gray rectangle of the curtained window, and on the other side of that thin glass and thinner curtain something stood and did not move and did not make a sound, and the two of them held there, a wall apart. For what Wade would later figure was close to a full minute, and which felt like no time he could measure at all. Denise was awake. He had not heard her wake, but he felt the change in her breathing, the way it had gone shallow and controlled, and he knew without looking that she was lying absolutely still, with her eyes open. And he was glad of her stillness, and he hated that she had to use it. Neither of them spoke. The thing outside the window did not speak either. Of course it did not, but the silence of it had a quality of attention, of a mind on the other side of the glass doing the same thing they were doing, waiting, listening, deciding. Then it made the sound. It was low at first, so low he felt it in the floor and in his chest. Before he heard it in his ears, a bass rumble that had no animal he knew behind it. And under the rumble threaded through it was a second thing, a fast, dry, chattering vibration, like two sounds coming out of one body at once, like two throats working in one chest. It was not a growl the way a dog growls or a bear growls. It was layered. It went on for a few seconds, and then it stopped. And the silence after it was worse than the sound had been, and then the footsteps started again, slow and deliberate and unhurried, moving away from the window and along the side of the trailer and out into the yard, and Wade stood at the window with the rifle and did not pull the curtain back. Because some animal certainty older than thought told him that pulling the curtain back was exactly what it was waiting to see if he would do. In the morning, the prints were in the yard. They came in from the tree line on the south side, and crossed to the trailer, and went down the long wall to the bedroom window, and stood there, two of them side by side under the glass, pressed deep into the frozen ground. Wade measured them with the tape from his truck box while the camp came awake around him. They were the same prints, 11.5 inches heel to claw. He measured the depth against the give of the frozen ground beside a print his own 240-pound frame left, and his print barely marked the surface, and the other sank a clear half-inch into it, and he stood there with the tape in his cold hands. Lloyd came and looked at the prints under the bedroom window, and this time he did not say bear, and he did not say dog. He stood there a long time, and then he said, "I'll call the warden service." The warden service said a deputy warden would come out when one was free, and that the description, a large two-legged animal leaving canine tracks, was not something they could prioritize over the open cases they had, and that if Wade had a clear photograph. Wade did not have a clear photograph. He had a phone, and he had stood at a window in the dark with the thing a yard away, and it had not once occurred to him to slide that curtain aside and put a sheet of glass and a phone camera between himself and the thing on the other side. He had hated, the few times he had tried over the years, how his phone camera made everything look small and harmless, and he understood now that the thing outside the window would not have looked small, that there was no evidence he could gather that would not be either too little to believe or too much to bear. The deputy warden did come. 2 days later, a polite young man named Theriot, who took photographs of the prints which by then had been walked over by the crew and softened by a day of sun, and who measured them himself and wrote the measurements in a notebook. He asked good questions. He did not laugh. At the end of it, he stood in the yard and looked at the tree line and said that he would file the report and that he would be honest with Wade, that a report like this went into a file and the file did not go anywhere, that there was no unit, no team. No number Wade could call that would send anyone up here to do anything about a thing that left a track and a sound and nothing a man could put his hands on. He said it the way an honest man says a hard thing, and then he got in his green truck and drove down the logging road. And Wade watched the truck go and understood that he was on his own up here, that he had always been on his own up here. The thing came back twice more over the next week. It did not come to the window again. It seemed to understand that the window had been a thing it could do once that the second time would not carry the same weight. And whatever it was not a thing that did a thing twice and expected the same return. The fourth night, it walked the perimeter of the camp, a slow circuit just inside the tree line, and it was the dogs that told them. The 2 camp mutts that lived under the cook shack and were afraid of nothing. And that night pressed themselves flat against the shack's underpinning, and would not come out, and would not stop a low continuous whine that went on until dawn. The 5th night it did not come at all, and the not coming was worse, because a thing that came on a schedule could be braced for, and a thing that came when it chose could not. And then on the 6th night it did the thing that told Wade what kind of mind he was dealing with, that the intelligence he had been inferring from the prints and the pacing and the patience was not something he had imagined into a dumb animal. The camp generator sat in a shed at the edge of the clearing and ran the lights and the well pump and the heat tape on the water lines, and it ran on a fuel line that came up out of a buried tank, and at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 6th night, the generator stopped. Wade was awake. He was always awake now, in the small hours, sitting at the galley table, with the rifle across his knees, and the lights on. And when the lights went out, and the generator's steady drone cut to silence, he was on his feet before the dark had fully settled. He had a flashlight. He went out into the yard with the flashlight and the rifle in the cold, and Lloyd came out of his own trailer with a lantern. And the two men met in the yard and went to the generator shed together, two old woodsmen who had between them 90 years in that country and not one explanation. The generator had not failed. The fuel line had been pulled loose at the tank fitting. Not cut, not chewed, not broken. Worked loose at the threaded fitting the way a man would loosen it with his fingers, except that the fitting was behind a steel guard plate that a man had to reach around and up under to get to, and the guard plate showed 4 long parallel scratches where something had reached past it. 4 scratches set the width of 4 fingers apart if the fingers were not fingers, and the scratches were 10 feet up the back wall of the shed where the thing had braced itself to reach down and in. Lloyd held the lantern up to the scratches, and the two men looked at the height of them, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Lloyd said, in a voice Wade had never heard him use, "It shut off the lights." It had shut off the lights. It had reached past a guard plate in the dark and disabled